Left me was the radio, and it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. And it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. When I press play, all I hear is you. And it goes like ooh, yeah, yeah. When I press play, all I hear is you. Oh, every single song tells me we're through. Yeah, but I can't turn it off cause it's the truth. Yeah, it's the truth. And it goes like
Welcome all, and happy World Press Freedom Day. My name is Thokozani, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Today, I am joined by Edward Tsumele, editor of City Life Arts, Nondumiso Msimanga, arts writer and actor, and Lindokuhle Nkosi, the founding editor of Arts 24. As we discuss arts coverage in the media, where is it and what now? Welcome, everybody. Hi. Great. All right. So to give a bit of context, before we hop on into our conversation, in a recent report released by the Campaign for Free Expression, we had discussed the state of free expression in the South African cultural sector. We explored many factors that have impacted the sustainability and the growth of the cultural sector, such as the politicization of boards, inadequate leadership, as well as censorship and self-censorship with creative workers, right? So today here at Artfluence, we want to draw on another component that plays a critical role in the longevity and the sustainability of the cultural sector. And that's the presence of art writers, reporters, and arts coverage in the social media sector. So to start off the discussion, I'd like to invite all panelists, in whatever order your thoughts might come to you. I think it would be nice to kind of contextualize what kind of space and access we used to have as arts writers in the traditional media for arts coverage, let's say within the last 20 years. What did that look like?
Well, if I can start off, yeah, it was very interesting. I remember when I started in the media writing about the arts, that was 1998 when I joined Sowetan. They had a very interesting supplement called Time Out. That was a supplement that every single artist wanted to be there. And I remember at that time, it was a time when there was a lot of artistic activity and vibrance because it was 4 years after democracy and there was a lot of creativity among artists. So they needed to be there whenever either they release an album or the theater show. So that time was very, very interesting at the time. And I remember it had a staff about the department about 4 or 5. And on daily, we would produce copy for the main board. And then on Friday, that's the supplement. So it was very interesting at the time. It was a good space to be in journalism as a young person. It was quite interesting, I must say.
I'll jump in, Edward. Hi, you can go, Lindokuhle.
Oh, sorry, Edward, we're losing you a little bit.
You're losing me?
So I don't know if it's okay.
No,
I was
sorry,
gonna jump in.
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to piggyback a little bit of what Edward was saying. So I haven't been writing for nearly as long, but I started writing in this upswell of like online publications. So when I started writing, I was an arts and culture writer for a publication called Mala, which is a small publication based out of Cape Town that was mostly online, but did like a quarterly print edition. And it was interesting because it was happening around the time that kind of cultural critique, because of social media and the Tumblr culture, like cultural critique and social critique was like creeping into the mainstream. So when you were talking about arts writers, there was a different culture that was being expected from like everyday reportage. This is what's happening at the theater, and like a gig guide, right? People wanted to know opinions, cultural critique. You were referencing your own positionality in the world. People were discovering their feminism, kind of reading identity politics in South African art, and everybody, everywhere you looked, had their own publication, you know? So yes, Mala magazine was started by anybody else, But while I was working at Mala, I had my own Tumblr, I had my own blog spot, and it seemed like everybody who was a writer had their own means of like self-publishing, you know. You look now, and I think that when the New Frame closed down last year, that was probably the death of a very particular space of long form arts journalism that also has cultural critique that isn't reportage. And I can't say in the mainstream space or even in spaces that are attempting to be mainstream that we have that kind of journalism anymore. But even us as the cultural producers, the impetus to make that kind of work, you know? That DIY culture or sort of arts coverage is gone. Everybody wants to have a byline in a very particular place as opposed to just creating the content themselves. And you also have this like influencer culture that has subsumed almost the role of the cultural critique or the arts writer, you know? I get messages like weekly from theaters, from record labels, from artists who just want to get their work out. Like, who do they speak to?
Yeah. I'll bridge in there because I feel as though I kind of have a foot in.
Sorry, Lindokuhle, I'm losing you a little bit.
So I think that there's a little bit of a delay. So you're not really
Yes.
losing me. You just don't hear like the end of what all of us are saying, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
That's all right. And perhaps yes, let's chat to Thokozani in the chat box, and I'll jump in the meantime. So I think I had my kind of entry into arts journalism and arts writing. Growing up, I was aware of Time Out and then the Tonight, and then trying to remember now what that other kind of weekly special edition was that Adrian and other writers, Adrian Sisha and other writers used to write for. So there was the sense that the kind of the newspaper was actually a space where you would be able to write and have a byline, like Lindokuhle mentioned. When I was coming into writing as a particular interest of mine, and I was really excited about that. And then when I begin writing, the situation starts shifting. So we actually start then moving into blog culture quite strongly. I had a Tumblr, everybody did. And, the kind of blogging world was really, really this, kind of like a new emergent space. And people were active, but they also had readership. And so everyone was really active in the blogging space. And it was quite exciting. And so when I begin a kind of formal writing profession, I start working between these two spaces. I'm writing for newspapers and publications, and I'm seeing that those spaces are already shrinking at the time that I'm starting to work. And so when I'm writing for festivals, I remember, for example, Dance Umbrella had a partnership where they were able to produce their own publication. And so people who were attending the Dance Umbrella, who weren't attending the Dance Umbrella, could access what was happening and read, criticism, read interviews, read reviews, read long form kind of features. And so it was a space where people were already trying to create new ways of publishing to help bridge the gap where newspaper and print was doing less and less kind of formal art writing in that sense. And they were looking more into lifestyle and entertainment news. And then the blog became a useful space to be able to put out kind of artistic analyses and critical writing about culture and how the arts are really very significant in kind of our cultural politics in that landscape. And I think for me, because I came into writing in that space, I was also quite aware of a particular distinction between reportage and the sense of writing about the arts as also shifting into a kind of cultural analysis space, and then review writing shifting, outside of the kind of art and entertainment world into a place where it was readers who were specifically interested in arts and culture that were coming into blogs to follow certain writers. And so those, newspaper and print really has become quite minimal for writing on the arts. And we did move online, and there was something also then new and exciting about that space. And it felt like it could create a place where art writing and cultural analysis could then grow again. And then that also started shifting with really kind of influencer culture, lifestyle, and all these things really just kind of squeezing out any type of regular artistic daily arts writing disappeared as a thing. I remember reading things from like the Edwards and the Adrians, and then seeing them get less and less. And so I think there also was a way in which then online magazines, the malas, other kind of print media started moving online, and that became exciting again. So I think there's been, quite a few ebbs and flows, and it's not just a kind of before and after, like grass greener, and then it was not. And I think right now we're in a kind of a dip again, and we're looking for where the new peak is going to go, especially after the heartbreak of losing a new frame, which had become such a significant space for writers, also because they actually paid competitive prices. So we weren't just writing for R1.50 a word like we would for news print, but we were getting paid for an article as a commission. And so it made sense to be a writer as well. And New Frame was like, yes, something new is happening. And then it went away. So now we're in a place where we're going, we need something else next. What's next?
Right. And so my next question was, sorry, go ahead, Lindokuhle.
I just wanted to interject because I loved what Nondumiso was saying, particularly about the ebbs and flows, because I've been thinking about that particularly a lot, I was the founding editor at Arts 24, which was the first time there were arts pages or mainstream arts coverage on News 24, which is the widest read publication in the country, right? Like, you almost can't compete with News 24 when it comes to coverage. And so entering that space and being like, okay, because I've always been interested. I come from like a journal background in terms of coverage from the arts, because I moved from like the more independent subculture writing space with Abomala to like the Chimaranga Chronics, which is a more journal and scholarly and academic teaching. But I've always been interested in how we speak in the mainstream, particularly about the arts, particularly when we're speaking about like Black creative production. How do we produce language about ourselves in a non-alienating way where people can access and see themselves reflected in the works that we produce, right? And so that was the question that I was asking myself around Arts 24. And when you speak about the ebbs and flows, I had to like remind myself to not be ahistorical, because when I started writing it was in like an upswell of everybody writing about the arts, but also realizing that when you speak about the arts, you're speaking about the world. You're speaking about humanity, how we negotiate ourselves. Our creative practice is like part of the performance of becoming human, right? And it felt though that when I was in this upswell, that people were already talking about this like dwindling, even though I thought we were in like the best part of it. And I look back and I'm like, yes, because we had a Y mag before, which is the reason I started writing. I saw people who looked like me in those pages speaking like me and being like, I can do that, you know? And so yeah, I kind of wanted to pick up on this idea of the ebbs and flows. And even now I've been like, okay, like Arts 24 is gone, New Frame is gone, but like it was built by us, right? Like Arts 24 didn't fall out of the sky. So what would it take for like us to build another Arts 24, another New Frame? And yeah, that's brought back that question of looking back at the history of speaking about the arts in South Africa, which took me back all the way to like 1889 to the first South African publication, which was Imvo Zabantu, which started in the Eastern Cape. And half of its pages were dedicated to arts and culture, right? And now we have, and like none of the mainstream pages dedicate pages to arts and culture outside of basically the Maiden Garden Arts one page. You've got City Press Trending, which is not an arts and culture page and doesn't try to be anymore. But to kind of look at like how even just the mainstream newspaper setting is struggling. And I think it's because they cut the arts pages and nobody's really making those connections.
Yeah. If I may come in there.
Go ahead, Edward.
Yeah, I think we need to put, if we are looking at arts coverage in the country and how it has dwindled over the years, I think we need to put it into proper context. I really agree with Nondumiso and also Lindokuhle that they've been dwindling over the years and steadily, and I've seen that happen. When I worked, I'm just using Sowetan because that's where I started and I spent a lot of my time there. It's not personal, it's not anything, but I saw that changing from 1998. By the time that I left, even though I left in between and went to other newspapers and came back, by the time that I left in 2012, Time Out was like a run-off paper. You know, it was part of the main. I think there were about 3 pages or so, because there was nothing really there, and it is also one of the reasons that I decided, you know what, I mean, there is nothing to write here. You can just be there and get a salary, but you know, you get disillusioned, especially if you're passionate about what you're doing. And so I left, and when I left in 2012, then I'm like, what am I going to do? Freelance a little bit for those publications that still needed to carry art content, and I did that. I mean, I wrote for Business Day and others for 3 years or so. But in 2017, it was clear to me that, you know what, the only thing that I needed to do now is to look for a new platform. And that's when we founded City Life Arts. And because there we could write the kind of art that the mainstream media was not carrying anymore. Because in as much as they felt, because they were under pressure because of the digital space, like what Nondumiso and Lindokuhle have just said, that there were bloggers and there were all these other people that have come into the space. In a way, it democratized the media space, which is fine, but also it became a competitor actually to traditional media in terms of covering the arts. And it looks like the mainstream media was far behind what a lot of bloggers were doing. They were more connected to the audience, the readers, than the traditional media was. They were very slow. So for me, that's what we wanted to capture on and say, look, can we start something that is more accessible, that is more connected to the arts than what is provided by traditional media? And that's exactly how we started. And I can tell you now, you look at all the media houses. There was Star Tonight, there was Friday on Mail and Garden, and there were lots of other. There were Time Out, there was Hola for Sunday World, which I worked for some time. All of them are gone, right? So that tells you that, and it's not that the readers have disappeared from the face of it. They're still there, but they consume information differently, and they use different platforms to consume that information. And that information, in most cases, comes from these new digital media spaces that have sprung up. Some of them, of course, are badly done. You know, people just try, one person tries, you know, but you can see, but there are those that are really, really beautifully done. Creative writers populate those spaces, some of them, even though they need some kind of training. Some of them you can clearly see, especially when it comes to issues of ethics and other issues like that. They are found wanting, but it doesn't mean they don't write good stuff, because the reality is that they do. And that's why some of them even call themselves influencers now, because they have a following. And I think This is where, in as much as we are struggling with arts coverage, spaces, and stuff like that, I think we should look at strengthening those new platforms. The people that have money must put resources there, and because this is how the new reader now for the arts looks for the information and they find it there. It's I mean, there are all lots of them. I mean, you look at a lot of main platforms. Sit Life Arts is not the only one. There are many others. I mean, you've spoken about New Frame, which was doing incredibly well, but there are others like Culture Review, for instance, which does a lot of incredible work, but they lack resources financially. They lack resources in terms of human resources, and that impacts on the quality of the work that they produce for the readers. But other than that, I can tell you now, the revolution is continuing and it's not going to go back. The digital world has arrived and we have to embrace it and see how we can use those platforms to sort of promote South African art. And our artists continue to produce good works. You look everywhere. The other day, you've seen that Senzeni, for instance, Mahasela, she has won a global prize in Germany. I mean, 70,000 euros is peak. And she's been struggling all along, like who would say struggling, but she's been incredible creating good work. And there are many others that we see that need, and the world is looking at us really and say, South Africa has got some of the best artists, some of the best creators here. And I think we should capture on that and create the necessary platforms that connects very well with the readership. And that way, then we can actually see art developing in this country.
Great. Thank you so much, Edward. Thank you, Lindokuhle and Nondumiso, for your inputs. And I think this ties in very nicely with something that you've all mentioned very passionately, which I'm curious to see. Let's say we are reimagining what arts coverage looks like in South Africa. We've mentioned the digital space and we've mentioned resources, and we're talking about how do we use language and create language that speaks true to Black creative production, right? How, in the most ideal world without any limitations, how would you imagine what arts coverage would look like now? I know we've mentioned a little bit, but like if you could build your own utopia on arts coverage, what would that look like?
I'd like to jump in with that. Yeah. Yes, I have kind of put forward that kind of dream to my students as well, because I do teach arts writing, and I think in doing workshops with young people who are fantastic writers and content producers, some of the things that we have discussed in terms of the, knowing what the actual limitations are and then dreaming into the future where the work that we want to do is actually given space. And, like Lindokuhle was saying, where we can also create the spaces, right? And because we are in right now a world of like mass content production, but it's highly visual, and the visual orientation has taken over from the kind of writerly orientation, which I think is also where spaces like New Frame and Culture Review, like Edward was mentioning, were also, just these kind of, oh, wait a minute, people actually do still want to interact with long form writing. And so with students, we would dream into how then can we actually start tapping into content production in the ways that YouTubers are, for example. How can we start creating our own channels so that we are able to work our skills as writers in new formats as well? And I think that as writers, we tend to forget, because we do value the word as it is written and we want people to read our words, we do forget sometimes that writing doesn't have to only be consumed through the written word. in that sense. And it can then exist in a YouTube channel that, structures also maybe something that does work like a journal format, or something that does work like a lifestyle format, something that does perhaps work as a kind of a Q&A format, right? One of those kind of channels where it's about the kind of questions that people have, and asking those questions of artists and the cultural industry, and asking about our lives and our livelihoods in a way that engages people. And so I think that there are, like Edward was saying, there are ways for us to really go into the digital space and start really taking on what it offers us. I think that AI is also now presenting something really fascinating, and I think that there are ways that we can get involved there. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm interested in hearing about from students in the next workshop that I do. What kinds of revolutionary ideas might we actually turn into real content, and be able to then continue to produce spaces that are new, that are forward thinking, that are really rigorous also, and that are, crafted with integrity and ethical thinking. And I think that there are really possibilities around that. I have, recently, in the recent past, in the past couple of years, I've been working with writing on social media, and seeing what that does in terms of really just getting people interested in following through and clicking into the reviews that are there online, because there has become a sense of a surfeit of all these different places and platforms where one can find a review, but people don't have a sense of where can they find reviews that they can trust again. And I think that's where part of the gap has been in the shift from having, our kind of credible news media having arts and cultural analysis, to then not having it, and people having to rely on what they come across or what they know or a person that they know to try and click and follow. And that makes it difficult for people. They are doing the work of having to search and find, and they don't really want to do that much labor. They want to know what they can trust and be able to follow through on that. And so that has been the part that I think has been difficult. And so in the dreams, dreaming outside of funding issues and all of that, it's also really the sense of the practical ways of going, so how do we generate the kind of, I think, stature that a New Frame had, the kind of, way that we trust a Mail and Guardian reviewer, even if it's just one review in a week that we have there. How can we generate that kind of, place where people can think about this is where we can find what we can trust, and what we know will be well written, and what we know will be interesting and exciting and speak to us in particular languages as well. And where are people doing the work, and where is it getting collectivized in the vast online space? And so I think those are the things that we now also really need to start thinking about, so that we can work into those places as we dream into creating new worlds.
Thank you.
Can I sure, can I interject? There was a lot that you said, and very a lot to take in, I guess, because I've been asking those similar questions, like I've been saying earlier, and because I dance between kind of like the journal and the mainstream space. So like this writing and the work is happening, right? And what we're speaking about is a very particular space, which is the mainstream space. But we forget kind of like the relationships between like the mainstream writing space and like citizen and community journalism, where a lot of art writing is actually still happening in community journalism, right? Like the people that we never pay attention to are still reviewing every single theater show, open mic, da da da, in like your small little place. So if you pick up like your district newspaper, like your Highlands paper, your Santon Chronicle, your whatnot, they have arts pages. They still have those like events pages where they just take pictures to be like, oh, who went to the event? Do you remember those? Like, I used to live for that, just to be like, oh, there was this that doesn't like exist anymore. But anyway, post leaving Arts 24 and trying to figure out where I want to position myself after, I was basically like, okay, let's go back to the DIY culture of building our own publications, which kind of feels like it's in line with the rise of the influencer, right? So how do we tap into that space to create publications in the ways that people want to receive their content, which is something that I'm a little bit iffy about as well, because I do think you also like, you train your readership. So what, people don't know how to read more than 100 words. I'm still gonna write a 5,000 word essay on Senzeni and somebody's going to read it, you know? So I also think that like, it's not our role as journalists to kind of pander to what we imagine the reader to be, because the reader, this imagined reader, particularly on mainstream publications, is very uninformed, very unintelligent, and is just a brand consumer. And we owe it to ourselves to imagine a more intelligent reader, because the readers are us, you know? And you don't want to have bite-sized 1 minute, whatever content. You want something where you can see the publication and the editor and the writer worked on this, you know? Which is another thing that we didn't speak about with the dwindling arts pages, is that there was also like a dwindling in the quality of the production. So some people don't want to write for these spaces anymore, and some readers don't want to go there, you know? And that's on us as the people producing the art content. But I've also noticed, in just trying to answer this question, because I am literally trying to build an arts publication right now, to be like, okay, so how do we use particularly influencer culture, which I'm quite suspicious of, and I'm a chronically online person. I have an Instagram page where I only do reviews. Like, I just go to art shows and take pictures, and like, I live online. I started writing online. The journal stuff happened after. But I'm suspicious of influencer culture, and I could never figure out why until I got to this question of building my own platform. And I think it's because it's very individual oriented, and it's not created around movements or genres or subcultures, and that means it's unsustainable, right? And when we go back to the days where everybody had a publication or whatnot, we're not talking about individuals, we're talking about groups of people coming together to create these platforms. It wasn't one person and I'm going to be the face of this thing, and I'm the curator of all Black arts or all feminist, I'm the theater chick or I'm the dance chick, you know? And when I look at like the culture of arts writing that's coming up under that, is everybody's trying to cement themselves as the arts person, these arts influencers. And unfortunately, it's so individualistic that you can't build enough upswell to create a movement around it.
Yeah,
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it
I
does.
think it does. I think it does. I think it does. It does quite a lot. Yes, it's very individualistic, and part of it also is that is the ego. You know, you want to be the one that is they know it all in terms of the arts. But also there is another side. Sometimes it's just lack of resources. When you don't have enough resources in terms of manpower, in terms of financial, it becomes a problem. Like, for instance, I can tell you now, I'm probably seated with the 4 or 5 every month, you know, young people wanting to come to City Life Arts and work with us. But I know that I just don't have enough money to pay them. And also even to look up, you know, because if you have people coming in there and they're young, they need to be mentored. You need to actually take care of them. You can't just say, okay, right. I know when I started, I was mentored by people that have been there and took me through the journey and taught me a lot of things that even today I'm using them now. So there's more than that. It's not just a question of giving somebody a platform. It's also mentoring them. It's also taking them through the journey and showing them how to do things, you know. So there is that element as well. And it's unfortunate because, you know, a lot of young people dream of writing, seeing their name there in properly run publications, beyond just I'm not saying blogs are not good enough, but I'm just saying beyond a blog, they want to be in some kind of mainstream or a publication that is moving towards mainstream, and therefore they need assistance, and so what do I think of the future? The future of art writing. I think it's actually brilliant, and I think with a lot of these voices that are coming up making mistakes, but some of them are pretty good. We have a good future, and I'm happy that people are moving away from celebrity-driven personality kind of writing. They're now starting to interrogate art. They're starting to engage with art. If they go and see an exhibition, they start to engage with the art on the wall instead of them taking a picture and then the art behind them. Now they make sure that at least the artwork, you can actually see the artwork. So they're starting to ask questions about art, and for me that's very important. I've always been a critique of sort of celebrity for the sake of celebrity in my writing, because I mean, I think, I guess, you get tired of that. I mean, what are you providing besides being you? So you want something else, you want substance. And I've seen that a lot with some of our readers, really, because we have a lot of visual art in our publication. And it really is people, it's actually mature people who want to consume content, engage with the content. And that's what they want. I think that's where we are moving. Even with all these bloggers that are coming in, and I think it's a good thing, because eventually they will tire of this personality-driven kind of content and start to engage with the content that is intellectually inclined, content that is beyond just looking at the personality. And that will start to happen. And I think, but we need to have, I think, a kind of, I wish a day when the old journalists kind of that were on traditional media can sort of meet somewhere with the young ones that are coming up that may not necessarily have the experience and the skills in terms of the craft of writing, the journalistic part of it, and sort of have that, because they have the energy. They have the energy. The youth have the energy, and they are good in terms of technology, and you need that. And the old ones, they don't really like technology, but they have the skills in terms of writing. But the young ones, even in terms of visual appreciation, they're the ones that can actually teach you what people want right now. So if you can have that kind of hybrid as kind of a content collaboration, that's the right word, then we have a very vibrant art scene in terms of art writing in this country. That's what I believe in.
Yeah. Can I just throw in one more thing? Because there's also a way, I mean, I think because we were also premised under the statement from the Campaign for Free Expression, I really want to always remind us not to, kind of be only in the sense of like before and after, or in a kind of oppositional dynamic of discussing things. And so I think even where we do have apprehensions about, say, like influencers and individualism and those kinds of things, that it's about building an ecosystem more than anything, right? And that we do need those different kinds of platforms. It's not just about creating one kind of platform as well. There isn't one kind of consumer, one kind of reader. And even when we imagine, like the mainstream reader, right? Like Lindokuhle, you were saying that they're, like, I don't remember how exactly you put it, but I had the picture of, kind of like this journalism lecture that I went to, where I was being told that it's like this old granny at the back of the bus and she doesn't know anything, and so on and so forth, right? And there's a way in which we then imagine that our readers are ignorant, that I don't think is necessarily true, right? And that the people who are consuming information and arts writing from people who are influencers, from people who are working even from a celebrity kind of framework, that there's a lack of intellectualism in that. I know that, a lot of pop stars, even, like a Lizzo or whatever, right? They have come through training and they have understood that the world that they want to function in is this kind of mainstream popular space. And that's for a reason. And it's not just because people are, silly for consuming media in that way, that also serves a very significant function in our world and in our being able to be human beings who can enjoy, right, life and what we produce in the different ways that we produce it. Because also not all art is trying to be, high-end journalist, like, or journal producing academic work. And so there are different ways of writing. And I think I like to, even when I'm working with my students, and we are talking about this question, imagining what it could be. I know that if I've got a class of 10 students, each of those are individual writers who could bring something completely different into our ecosystem that would be extremely valuable, right? And so you do have the ones that could become the podcast producers, right? And different kinds of podcasts. You could have the ones that are doing the podcasts that are extremely academic, yeah, where we're really in a discourse format, yeah. You'd have the ones that are going to be the Chimurenga writers, yeah, the ones who are going to be trying to do things that are, creatively inclined, where they want to be able to create visual maps of what this particular production was doing, of how Hamlet has been existing in different formats for a long time, and that in South Africa in particular, this work that keeps coming back is now finding a language that is very, very particular to us and how we are not just consumers of Western work anymore, but we are recreators of it. You could have the person who is then going to be the academic who's going to go to teach at the university and is going to produce the academic articles that are going to then position Senzeni Marasela into academia, so that other young thinkers want to teach, want to write, want to follow, what kinds of ways Senzeni has been creating work, and, the political discourse in terms of the media that is being used. So we really also have to keep remembering that we are in an ecosystem. And I think as cultural producers ourselves, as writers, we are not just archivists, but we are really producing what the culture is and what the culture values. And so we also need to be cognizant of the different kinds of value systems that we might be operating with that then neglect, the particular kinds of artistic creation that is, perhaps in more mainstream culture becoming much more popular in terms of the capitalist framework we're in at the moment, right? But some of those people are doing those things and they're underwriting in those places, they're subverting things. And we need to think about how we are living. And this is how we're living. So I think we do definitely also need to just be wary of the kind of valuations we give to what we think of as the creation of writing.
Can I
Agreed. I
just
think
jump
that
in
this
there?
is
I don't know if it's
sure.
just to clarify or to be like a little bit provocational. I'm not sure,
Ooh.
right? Because so here's my thing is like when we talk about an ecosystem, because we are talking about not whether or not you are able to sustain yourself as an arts writer or whatnot in this country, right? Which I think is part of what we're talking about in the ecosystem, but it's not the conversation, right? We're talking about the ecosystem at large. And I think if we're honest, we're not in a healthy ecosystem for critical, sustainable arts coverage in this country, right? And we're always going to like try to figure out, did it happen with the moment of digitization? Did it happen with the moment of radio and television? Did it happen with a moment where like you couldn't no longer be like an arts writer, you had to be like an arts multimedia producer? So now you must, not only should you be able to, not you need to have the skills to have a podcast, you must produce a podcast and a film and a whatnot, right? I'm in my early 30s and I've had to make documentaries, audio documentaries, podcasts, radio shows, television. There's not a single writing skill that I haven't developed. And it's fun to be able to work in those ways. That's not the critique. right? The critique is not the tool, because even online, social media, whatnot, those are tools. They're not the content. What I'm talking about is whether or not individualistic culture creation, that culture of individuals and celebrity culture as arbiters of like media publication, creates a healthy ecosystem. And I think looking at the South African media ecosystem, we can say that it doesn't, you know,
Yeah.
because the influences are there, the places are there, but where's the writing? Why are the pages shrinking? Why is the intellectual bar dropping? These are signifiers of an unhealthy like environment, right?
I
So I
think
don't know.
someone
I don't know if it's a clarification or a provocation,
Yeah,
Richard.
yeah,
no, I
absolutely,
agree. I
absolutely.
think
And I
that's
think, yeah, just
oh.
to close that one, I think that you know, in the space where we were dreaming, right, into what, you know, a utopic ecosystem might be, that's the place that it was at. But we are absolutely in an unsustainable environment, and we're all trying to keep learning all these different tools to be able to survive in this world, and we're not surviving. And so I think in our utopia, what we need to add is the money that actually allows for all of these tools to then actually produce real income, because that's where we are finding ourselves in at the moment. We're overworked trying to do all of these different things so that we can be seen and be employed and be valued, so that we can actually make our rent right at the end of the month. But the money doesn't match the work at the moment. So that's the one thing we've missed in our utopia that I definitely think we need to put in, so that it is healthy, and we can afford to do all the things.
And I guess also the respect for what it is that arts writing does. Sorry, we're cutting you out, but like,
No, go ahead. Y'all are having
but
the time of your lives. Please go ahead.
do you know it took for all these art spaces to disappear, for even like the galleries and the like media houses, I almost mentioned the name, and the like record labels to freak out. They're freaking out, right? And there's a lot. I work very closely with galleries. I used to work before like closely with the record labels, but now mostly with visual and performance artists. And you, and like even in the arts ecosystem, the value of the arts writer is almost as important as the artist, right?
Yeah.
You could produce the most amazing work, but if people aren't theorizing what you're doing and making it real to somebody outside of just the collector who's buying the work, you might as well not exist. Nobody's going to remember you, right?
Absolutely.
And arts, even in the gallery system, they keep going for the same old the same old traditional art critiques with the same old conversations, and it's no longer working for them because they had locked themselves in this like dinosaur ecosystem, and they were relying on the traditional media spaces to provide different voices and different critiques for the artists without having to commission that work themselves. They're relying on getting it for free. The arts pages are gone. And the consequence of that, the direct consequence of that, is that they can't sell the work the way that they could. Nobody's theorizing it. Nobody's saying this work is important. Nobody's saying it allows ourselves to see ourselves in the world. The work of artists, and particularly art writers, and it sounds a little bit arrogant, but it's to tell you why this work matters, to contextualize ourselves in the work, both in front of the frame as the reader, as the viewer, but behind as the person who's thinking about it, who's producing it. It brings those worlds together, you know? And by and large, those worlds have not been respected. So even when the arts pages were there, we weren't getting paid. So the value of the arts writer has never been important in the ecosystem, where we are the whole ecosystem. We've always been at the bottom of the value chain or the food chain, you know?
Yeah.
And
And can I just add one more thing? Because I think that's a really, really significant part of the ecosystem that I think a lot of people tend to not understand. I know that, for example, I have had to fight for why criticism should even be a thing with other artists, right? Because sometimes artists will read something that isn't laudatory or isn't affirming of their work, and they'll take it personally, and they come back at the writers and they go, you don't even know anything, you don't even do the work, so why are you even there? Why do critics get given this space and this power of the word to say what is valuable at all? And I can agree with some of those contentions, right? Because sometimes we are dealing with people who are unethical writers because of various reasons, right? But people fail to understand, and even artists themselves. And I've really, in the past few years, started to recognize how much cultural institutions have failed to understand the importance of the writers in their ecosystem. And yes, when the media publications shrunk in the mainstream, then there was this panic, and it is happening right now. There's a great deal of panic because in our artistic and cultural industry, we are actually living in an unsustainable industry as a whole. We are an industry that relies on funding,
Absolutely.
right? And so we are also then, in terms even of our government, seen as an industry that is at the lowest rung of what is important and what needs to be given attention. And we saw that during COVID and so on. And we're now dealing with a world that is desperately trying to claw for a sustainable space in this industry. We're dealing with institutions and artists who are desperately trying to make their work, their lives, their livelihoods sustainable. And we have institutions that are derelict and are, mismanaged or just disappearing. We have works that are sitting in vaults, molding. And part of our work as art writers is to advocate for those things, to value them, and to say this is why we should value them, to contextualize them, to give them discourse, to also give them a lens where people weren't recognizing that this thing that is happening in our world artistically, in our kind of creative expression, is actually our moment right now. And that's what art writers do. And even more than that, right? Because we archive our world and we then leave what it is going to be known about the artists of our present. And we also are part of the ecosystem in terms of employment. Artists don't get grants, they don't get residencies, they don't get employment without being able to prove that they have writers who have been writing about them, that their work has been valuable enough for people to actually document, to think about it. And so we are such a critical part of the ecosystem, but we're not seen as that by artists, by institutions, until the question of sustainability is at crisis mode. And in fact, we're always really in some kind of crisis with this industry because we are a grant industry. That's how we exist. And that's why New Frame died, right? Because they were being funded. They didn't have a broad base of getting, their funds. It was being funded by a patron who then could decide at the blink of an eye that we're done with this paper and everybody's jobs are gone.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for your inputs and that very passionate exchange, because I think that this is important. And like, as we say, within the ecosystem, we have diversity, and within that diversity is, things are going to come up that challenge us personally, professionally, as a collective, individually. And I think that these are the difficult conversations that need to start happening, because you're right. arts writers should not be at the bottom of the ecosystem, and we shouldn't be having these conversations when sustainability is, when we are struggling with sustainability and when we are in crisis mode. And like, arts writers should exist all the time at the level that they are at, constantly through the good times and the bad, and not just calling upon you to save us when sustainability is falling apart. So I really appreciate your very honest and transparent inputs. And I think that this is a really beautiful start to a conversation that hopefully we can keep going at, more stages into the year, because I think that this is really important stuff that you have said. We have a few more minutes, and I would like to close with one last question, which 30 seconds each maximum, please. If you could tell a young professional, a young arts writer coming into this industry, one thing you have learned that you want them to hold dearly throughout their career, what would that thing be?
Well, I would say that the art space is the greatest space for your soul, for your mind, for your intellect. Go in and do magic.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Edward. Lindokuhle, Nondumiso?
Okay,
Very
I would
quiet.
say be intellectually rigorous and community based. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Yes, thank you.
Mine is definitely around create a community, because then you will be able to hold yourself accountable and hold others accountable. You'll be able to dream together. You'll be able to create together. So create a community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me today, for your insights, your inputs, sharing your experiences. This has been a very insightful and hopefully insightful to everyone who's been watching conversation. Thank you for your time, and thank you to everybody who has joined us for this really important conversation today.